Hey guys, Mr. Liloia here. The date is Friday, March 20th, 2020. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. So in this video that I'm going to post to Google Classroom is just going to go over the reading that you guys should have done already for section 1 in chapter 8. I am not going to go over the questions that you guys should be working on, those 5 questions in the check your progress at the end of the section. I will post a video on Monday that will go over what I was looking for in each of those 5 questions or what they were asking you and stuff like that. But what I'm going to do today in this video is just give you guys a brief rundown or summary of what you should have been reading. And whether or not you guys realize it, you guys certainly do benefit from hearing another person talk about a primary source document, a textbook reading, an assignment, a homework assignment, anything. I know I do, and I bet all of you do. You really do benefit from hearing someone else tell you this is what the assignment is about, or this is what the reading is about. So that's what the focus of this video is going to be on, just a rundown or a summary of what the reading is about. So I'm going to start on this first page where it says, Section 1, Washington takes office. There really isn't a lot for me to explain on this first page. It's really like almost like a book or a novel. They're just trying to paint a picture in your head about what the time was like, about Washington traveling to New York City, that it took him 8 days, that large crowds were everywhere, and that a newspaper reported this quote, and it says that many persons in the crowd were heard to say they should now die contented, nothing being wanted to complete their happiness but the sight of the savior of his country. So it's saying that some people were just so ecstatic that they almost felt like, oh, well, now I could die happy. I feel like our country is in this wonderful place. We accomplished everything we set out to accomplish at the beginning of the American Revolution. And this was printed in April of 1789, the same month that Washington was inaugurated into office. Anyway, I'm going to scroll down to the second page. So it talks about an inauguration. So it gives you actually two blue highlighted vocab words, if you want to call it that. So an inauguration, it starts out with that first. It says it's a ceremony in which the president takes an oath of office. This is something that every president does. They traditionally lay their left hand on a Bible and they swear an oath to the office of the president, to the Constitution, to protecting our rights, protecting our country, all of those things. And then usually, traditionally, they have like a big party afterwards, a celebration. And we still do this today. And it doesn't matter if it's your second time in office. So if President Trump wins the 2020 election and he gets sworn into office again, they still have the same inauguration ceremony. They still have, a ball or a dance, a big celebration, big party to celebrate, that one night. And then usually the next day, they get right down to work and start up working in this new job. But what was unique for Washington was that no one else had done this before. He's the first president. No one had set a template for our country or a guide for our government. Sure, we had a framework with our Constitution, but that was about it. So he had to set the president, and that's what that vocab word is there, Precedent. And it says an example to be followed by others in the future. And that is what Washington had to do. He had to create the template. He had to set the example for other presidents to follow. And that is what is so unique about this time in our country's history. So let's move down a little bit to this next section, this blue section. It says the executive branch. It sort of explains for you what the government looked like. It said in this time, in 1789, the federal government was made up really of just a couple small things, guys. 75 post offices, a few clerks. Clerks are people that work, in the judicial system, and a tiny army of 672 soldiers. That's it. Think about how large our government is today. Think about all the different, people you're seeing on TV right now with this global pandemic on local, state, and federal levels. All the different departments, all the secretaries, all the health officials. None of that existed in 1789. All we had were post offices, people who worked in the courtrooms, and a really small army. That's it. So, therefore, it was one of the first jobs of President Washington was to set up some of the branches of government, specifically for him, the executive branch. So one of the first things they did was they set up three departments. Congress passed a law to create three departments: a Treasury Department, a State Department, and a War Department. Each of those departments would be headed by someone called a secretary, guys. That's the person that's the boss of each of those departments. So the Treasury Department, you've been seeing Steve Mnuchin a lot on TV. He's our Secretary of the Treasury. They run the finances for the government. The State Department, they're in control of our relations with all other people or all other countries around the world. And then, of course, our Department of War or Department of Defense today, which deals with all matters on the military or war. So, who did Washington appoint to each of these? So, if you read further in reading, it tells you that Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury. He was considered an economic genius, an expert on economic affairs. The next job that Washington had to fill was Secretary of State. Thomas Jefferson. He would choose Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, to do this. And his job, like I said before, was to manage our relations with all other countries. And then Henry Knox, a former general in the American Revolution, was Washington's next choice for the Secretary of War or Secretary of Defense. But there would be another important role or job, and that's Edmund Randolph. And he would become the attorney general or the attorney for the country. All right. Oh, one more thing, really important. Um, all these people collected together, that's called the country's cabinet. So you're going to hear that word probably a lot right now on TV with everything about Trump, reaching out to his cabinet for advice. That's the term that we give to this grouping of all these different department jobs. All right, let me scroll down, just like in class. All right, something else that was important was we needed to set up a court system. And you guys read about something called the Judiciary Act of 1789. What that basically did was set up the Supreme Court. Because although the Constitution said we were to have a Supreme Court, no government official and no American knew what the Supreme Court was going to look like or what the job of the Supreme Court was. So under this act, it said that the Supreme Court would be made up of 6 judges, that there would be several different local and state district courts that would hear appeals from the state courts before they reach the Supreme Court. And Washington would appoint a man named John Jay from New York City or New York as the first Chief Justice, or you can call, I guess you can kind of think of that like the leader of the Supreme Court, the head judge. All right. I'm going to move on to this next section, the nation's first economic crisis. So, as you guys know, we were in a huge debt after the American Revolution because we had no money. We had to borrow a lot of funds. We were $52 million in debt. So, one of the things that the country did to raise money was sell bonds, which was a certificate that said you were basically investing money into the government, and then at a later date you could cash in that certificate, not only get your money back, but then a little bit more with interest on top of that. So people thought, foreigners and Americans thought it was possibly a good investment. But an issue came about because there were complications as to whether or not the government would ever be able to pay back those bonds. So some people sold those bonds at a loss, but eventually the government was able to pay those bonds back, and some people did make money. So that created a little rift because people got really annoyed by that. And people who make these risky investments, and that's another bolded word, they're called speculators. And it says people who invest in a risky venture in the hope of making a large profit. So a good comparison to that today, and I know some of you might be aware of this, are like cryptocurrencies. I know all of you guys have heard the word Bitcoin. That's a speculative market to invest in. Sure, there have been a lot of people that have made a lot more money, but there's a lot more people still buying into it today, hoping that it's a get-rich-quick kind of scheme. So that would be a good example of speculation today. But anyway, let me see here, guys. I think we can move forward to the next page. So Hamilton had to get us out of this mess, right? So Hamilton was supposed to be the economic genius. So he comes up with a plan, it tells you in this next section. And in the plan, it says the US government, or that Hamilton had three parts to this plan. And they outline those parts to you guys. It says number one, the government would fully assume or agree to pay all federal and state debts. That means that the federal government would agree to pay any debts that the states took on during the Revolution and all nationwide federal debts. Number two, it says the government would create a national bank that would become a very controversial thing that even Andrew Jackson would deal with several presidents down the road. And then third, the government would impose high taxes on goods that would be imported to the country, otherwise known as tariffs. All right, paying the debt. Let's see here. So a lot of the states, guys, in this section of paying the debt, a lot of the southern states weren't happy about having to also help the northern states pay off their debts. A lot of the southern states paid off their debts during or after the war, after the revolution. And they had an easier time paying off that debt because a lot of the fighting was happening in places like Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, a lot of the northern states, right? Not so much in the southern states, so they didn't have as much debt to take on. So therefore, those southern states thought to themselves, well, how is this fair? We paid off our debt, and now we got to help New York or we have to help Massachusetts pay off their debt. So this was something that Hamilton had to get the southern states sort of on his side. So this is how he did it. Basically, after a debate of 6 months, he said to them, uh, we'll move the new capital to the south. And you might think, well, why is that important? Or, maybe that sounds dumb. We'll move the new capital to the south. Well, wherever a capital is placed in a country, guys, holds a lot of significance. A lot. It's usually the epicenter of culture, of the economy, of government. All this important stuff is taking place there. And it would make the South seem more important. So the South agreed. South said, "Fine, we'll adopt your financial plan if you move the capital to the South." And that's how we got Washington D.C. And you read this last sentence here. It says, "The capital would rise along the banks of the Potomac River between Virginia and Maryland," and that's where D.C. is today, between Virginia and Maryland. Right. The second part of all this, the national bank. So Hamilton called for a national bank, and he said the bank would be a place where the government could put its money, and it would also be able to create paper money that would serve as our national currency, a dollar. So anyway, there was going to be a debate that was going to go on about that. Thomas Jefferson, who certainly, I guess to put it lightly, disliked Alexander Hamilton, said that all this was, and here's the vocab word, unconstitutional or contrary to what is permitted by the Constitution, meaning that he was going to argue, Jefferson was going to argue that this national bank was unconstitutional, that it was illegal, that that Alexander Hamilton, the federal government, couldn't create a government-supported national bank. So this leads us into this next paragraph to talk about their views. And there are two ways that people still today view the Constitution, either a strict interpretation or a loose interpretation. A strict interpretation of the Constitution, guys, means that you just simply read the Constitution, whatever it says is legal, and that's that. A loose interpretation means that you can interpret the Constitution. You can kind of maybe take a guess as to what the framers or the authors were writing, or sort of that phrase I like to use with you guys a lot, read in between the lines. It allows you to do that. So that's where this came from. I'm just going to skip forward because we'll talk about the Whiskey Rebellion in a little bit more. But anyway, Congress did pass a law allowing the national bank to be created. This is something that even today historians still in those academic circles, universities and colleges or whatever it may be, still disagree about today whether or not that was um, whether it was constitutional of Hamilton to do this. Oh wait, I'm missing something really important though. I need to go back up. So, how Hamilton got this passed through, though, was he pointed out that there is something called the elastic clause in, let me see, is there a highlighter function? I think there is. Let me see, or a pen, I guess. Let me just circle this. So, oh, okay, this works good. All right, guys, so here. So, Hamilton points out that there's something called an elastic clause, which is in Article 1 in Section 8, and it says that the Constitution can give Congress the power to make all laws necessary and proper for fulfilling its duty. Basically saying that in the end, if Congress needs to pass a law, even if it's controversial, but if that law is going to better help the country and help our future, then they can go ahead and pass that law. And that is pretty much what Hamilton used to justify, passing the national bank. And then the final part, we're almost done, guys. The final part is the high tariff. So a tariff, let me get the pen out again, right here. It's a tax on imported goods. So what that would do is hopefully that would drive people to buy American goods, because if you're taxing imported goods from Germany, Great Britain, or other countries that are coming, or goods that are coming from outside our country, that would make those foreign goods more expensive, and therefore hopefully drive people to buy the less expensive American-made goods, and it would help, our economy and everything like that. All right, and we're almost done, guys. And the last thing I want to talk about with you is the Whiskey Rebellion. So, the Whiskey Rebellion is an interesting facet of our history. Congress, with these taxes that Hamilton wanted to put on different products to help raise money for the country, Hamilton would create a tax that he'd put on corn in an effort to raise funds for the Treasury, but instead it actually led to a bloody rebellion. So what happened was a lot of these backcountry farmers in Pennsylvania, they had maybe extra corn left over, right? And instead of letting that corn just rot in a silo or on the farm until next season, a lot of the farmers decided that they could distill corn into whiskey. And you can turn corn into corn mash, and that's the main ingredient to make the alcohol for the whiskey. So, therefore, since whiskey is a corn based product, it would also be have that tax imposed on it. So many of the farmers were really upset because they felt like the government was destroying, I guess, their own industry. And a lot of the farmers began to organize protests and they refused to pay the taxes. So if you read on, it said here, let me get the pen out. It said that in 1794, officials in Western PA or Pennsylvania tried to collect the tax. But before they did that, let me get the eraser. There we go. Before they did that, though, guys, the farmers began to rebel. They got violent. It went from peaceful to violent. They were burning down homes. The protests became kind of scary. So Washington responded to this by sending in the military, and he sent in about 13,000 troops. And once those people in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia heard about these troops coming in, they all kind of scattered and they left. And the rebellion was actually put down without any deaths being had or anything like that. So it was an important test of the new government. It showed that Washington could put down a rebellion, he could show the strength of the federal government, and that the Constitution, most importantly, worked. That's what it showed, that the Constitution worked and that the federal government worked and that Washington was able to put down a bloody rebellion without even killing anyone or any lives being lost. So pretty amazing. All right, guys. So next week I will post another video going over the check your progress questions. And as always, if you guys have any questions about anything, send me a private comment on Google Classroom, send me an email, whatever it may be, and I'll certainly get back to you guys as quick as I can. And it is Friday, so as I always tell you guys, enjoy your weekends. I hope you guys find something fun to do, even though we're all kind of cooped up indoors. But remember, this is for the better of our country, so that we come out of this on top, guys. Our country's been through a lot. We went through World War I in a pandemic. We went through World War II. And we got through those times, and they were really tough times, and we came out of them successful. And we'll do the same with this thing, too, as long as we just follow the guidelines. All right, guys, have a great weekend, okay? I hope you guys enjoy your weekends. Bye.